Hello and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence. I'm really excited to explore today the topic of what is your preferred communication style? You might have noticed that you have your way of communicating, and when you're working with other people who are similar to you, then that flows, that works really well. But what happens when you're communicating with people who perhaps approach communication in a very different way to you? That might be more challenging, and that can be a real difficulty, particularly if you're in meetings with people who have different styles to you. And that can have a real impact in terms of your connection and how you're landing the conversations. So in today's episode, we're going to be exploring the 4 key thinking preferences, which are based on the MIND model from My Brain International. This is a particular model which I'm certified in and I use in my training with individuals and teams. And I find it incredibly powerful because it helps us understand how is our brain working, how are we thinking, and ultimately, how does this influence how we communicate with other people? This is because our brains like an easy life. We tend to have our habits, our usual ways of doing things, and that means that we tend to gravitate towards 1 or 2 ways of communicating. And when we meet people who have that very different style to us, then it becomes more challenging because maybe they prefer to be communicated with in a very different way. And we're not used to doing this. So what I will do now is give you a very brief introduction to those 4 key thinking preferences from the MIND model. And I want you to really reflect as I'm speaking and consider these questions. Which of these thinking preferences sound like they're most like you? Who in your team is similar to you? And who is different? And have a think about whether you have any insights now about how you might adapt your communication style to particularly connect better with people who are very different to you. So let's get straight in. The first thinking preference is reasoning. Reasoning preference. People who have this preference tend to be very rational, very logical, and they love their facts and data. They want to know the what. When it comes to communication, what's really important to be able to influence and connect with people who have this preference is to make sure that you've got the data and information and charts to persuade them because they really believe in the strength of data. They don't necessarily need to see all of the data. They prefer to have that helicopter view or executive summary of the information. But they want to see that in a very presented in a very logical way. So really, to be able to connect with people with this preference, it's best to have very structured arguments and points to put across to them. If you are presenting information visually, then bullet points works really well. So that's our first thinking preference, reasoning. Next, let's move in to talk about feeling. So people who have the feeling preference are really focused on other people as well as themselves. So they're really interested in, what do I think about this? What do others think? And they're the people in the room who are always observing, not just listening to what's being said, but what's not being said and the body language of others around them so they can really interpret what's going on more fully. They're very interested in other people's views and feedback. And it really helps, to think about when connecting with people who have this preference, to give them that sense of, What are your real views on this? Sharing your feelings openly and really helping them to get a full picture of what's going on in the moment. So that's our second preference, feelings. The third preference I'd like to talk about is called spontaneous. And people who have this preference are very creative. They have very much like to focus on the big picture and the big idea. And they are very much about, give me the vision and the overall idea so I can understand what's going on. They're not so interested in the details of the plan, but they want to be inspired and excited when you communicate with them. So think about the best ways to do this. It could be about how you use visuals and particular images to really connect with them. It could also be that storytelling works particularly well to really get them on board with what you're trying to communicate. So experiment here and see what works. But remember, the people who have this preference are very focused on the future. They want to be excited by new ideas, trends, forecasts, and like to explore this idea of what if. So definitely doing brainstorming with somebody who has this preference is a great way to connect with them. And then the final preference is the specific preference. People who have this preference really love to get into the details of the plan. They really want to understand, how is this plan going to work? How is this idea going to work? So they're the kind of people who will ask you quite detailed questions and expect to have answers to these. They want to know what are the risks and the contingencies. They also really are people who like to reflect and fully understand all the information before sharing their own views. So, bear in mind that might take more time. You might need to plan to send information for pre-read, or you might need to send them further information in appendices to help them fully understand the picture. Make sure you satisfy that need for detail in order to get them on board and connect well with your communication. So that was the fourth one. So as you can see, 4 quite distinct thinking preferences. They are reasoning, feeling, spontaneous, and specific. And I'm sure now that you're probably starting to reflect which one is most like you. I'm also wondering whether you're starting to think about people in your team and who is most similar to you and who is perhaps a little bit different. And perhaps you now realize you might need to adapt your own communication style to have a better result with them. I hope this episode has brought you some fresh insights, some different ways to think about this and about your communication style. And please, if you have any questions, please do reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm Victoria Reynoldson. My personal profile is over there and the link is in the show notes. And of course, if you are fascinated by this area, as I am, about how your thinking preferences influence your communication style, and you think this would be powerful for you individually or as a team to understand your full team's preferences, then please do reach out to me. And I can explain more about the Mind profiling tool from my brain, and also explain to you a little bit more about the team communication training that I do. So thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. It's great that you've joined me for this episode, and I would absolutely love it if you've enjoyed this episode and found it helpful and valuable with the insights I've shared. It would be wonderful if you could rate the show, leave me a review. It's free to do that. And obviously, please feel free to share it as well. And finally, do just subscribe so you make sure you receive the next time the episode goes live. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Cultural Communication Confidence.